Hi, I'm here with Martin Hulbert, CTO of Ignite Technology, and we're here to talk about automation and how that might help enterprises and organizations with their AI. Hi, Martin, how are you doing?
Hi, very good, thank you.
Okay, so the first question for you is, how does AI affect the way organizations curate and manage data?
Yeah, and that's a really good, interesting question to start with, to be honest. If we look at kind of the emerging trends and analysis that's coming from the analysts in the market, we are seeing that there's kind of three top level categories everyone's broadly aligned with, and they kind of sit in strategy, capability, and change management. And right in the middle of that capability pillar, if you like, is data. Data is definitely coming out as one of the biggest, most important hurdles that most organizations have when it comes to their AI strategies. And AI is really interesting because it's truly a disruptor at the moment in the industry, because IT kind of weren't really the drivers behind it a lot of the time. There's this interesting kind of pincer movement going on at the moment where they're being influenced by people in the business who are seeing AI, Gen AI specifically. So let's talk about what's sometimes known as the cool AI that everyone talks about. And they're seeing this, they're seeing it all over the place. They're seeing their children use it, and they're thinking, why aren't we using it? Why is my organization not using it? I'm not using this at work. So they're using it everywhere and seeing it everywhere, and they're asking these questions. And equally at the top as well, the board are saying, well, everyone's talking about AI. Why aren't we doing anything with AI? If we don't do anything with AI, we're potentially seen as irrelevant in the marketplace. So we need to do something. So they're getting these pressures come in from both sides, essentially, in the way that things are happening at the moment. And it's really and truly kind of layered itself over the top of existing problems. Data's been a problem for a long time. We've allowed data, because of the cost of data has gone down, we've allowed it to just grow and grow and grow. And we still have systems in organizations that aren't connected to one another. We still have the problem of there's no common model between those systems. And it's actually quite difficult for a lot of organizations to actually bring that data together. So this is an old problem. And now we've just layered AI over the top, but everyone wants it. So they're having to strive forwards and actually come up with ways of bringing all this data together in kind of a way that they haven't really been pushed to do before. And not only that, we've then got to make sure the data arrives on the other side and actually makes sense, so that we've got matching data sets coming from different systems, and we can actually bring them all together. So it's truly quite an interesting time at the moment, seeing organizations, different strategies trying to come together to actually pull all of this together. So it is a big disruptor, I think, in terms of organizations and the way they're having to sort of pull this out of everywhere to get everything sorted. So yeah, good first question.
Okay, and what do you need to do to make sure the right data is used to train your models?
Yeah, and that's the second kind of major point, really. Once we've got the data, how do we make sure it's actually what we need? So we already have seen kind of very good examples, well, actually bad examples, I guess, of what happens when you don't get that right. And we get biased answers coming back out of AI models that people have trained. We've seen incorrect information being given. We've seen cars being given away for $1. These are all examples of where not getting that data right to feed into the models is really causing major problems. And it's an interesting consideration when, if you look at it, that suddenly you now have the AI engaged directly with your customers in a lot of instances, like an employee would be engaged with those customers and giving them answers. It really is critical that those models that you've trained actually have the correct information, and they actually are able to make the correct decisions using the correct data. And as we've just said, getting data from everywhere is actually pretty difficult. So, that's a real big problem for a lot of organizations. And we really don't want biased data to be entered into the system. We want to make sure that we've got up-to-date data. We want to make sure that all the pieces we needed actually landed on time, wherever they are. So it's a real problem that a lot of organizations are facing right now in terms of actually making sure that that's correct. And as I said, it's data being one of the biggest parts of the hurdles that everyone has right now in terms of organizing for AI in the new world we live in. It's really key.
Okay. What challenges does the current tech stack present to bringing that data in?
So, I mean, we've spoken about obviously kind of how it's quite difficult still for organizations to move data from one system to another. If we look at kind of what's been happening over the last few decades in terms of how things have moved around, we've still got, depending on the age of the organization and the size of the organization, we've still got a lot of different elements that are actually around. So we've got, in some instances, we might have mainframe, we've got legacy systems, we've got SaaS systems that came along, we've got cloud-based systems, we've got on-premise systems, databases, data warehouses. So there's all these things going on, and IT was very much having an initiative at the time. A lot of the large banks were trying to move from mainframe as best they could onto newer platforms. With varying degrees of success, of course. But these were all strategies they had in place and things they were trying to do, and they were trying to move from legacy systems to newer platforms as well. So they've kind of had that problem already. They had initiatives to start moving things around, and then suddenly now they've got AI coming again, sort of be layered over the top. So when you consider that as something that, again, they weren't really driving themselves, they've now got this problem where you've got this spread out tech stack that's moving around anyway, where they're trying to move perhaps to the cloud, or they're trying to position something in a different place. And now all of a sudden they've got to provide all this data, they've got to get it right, and they've got to get it into the right places at the right times from all these different sources, whilst also trying to maneuver the tech stack as well underneath, because those strategies still can't stop. They might have a system that's going end of life, for example, or they might have a platform that's been decided that they're ending that contract with the supplier and they have a deadline to get off that system. That's all still happening whilst they're trying to provide the organization, the data scientists, the data they need to make sure these AI models are all correct. So it's an old challenge that's been around for a long time, but essentially you've kind of got this driver that's coming over the top that really wasn't sort of on their roadmap. I don't think most IT organizations would have asked for this to happen to them. But this is where they, as I say, you've kind of got that pincer movement going on at the moment where everyone's very excited and everyone's seeing Gen AI as the future and everyone's moving towards it. So I do think the tech stack as it stands today and the tech stack they are moving to both present problems, very much so in the way that organizations are trying to pull all of this together.
Yeah. How important is AI governance?
So it's become much more increasingly important, mainly because the regulatory bodies, so the UK, the EU Act, have all brought out new guidelines around AI. They've both taken different approaches, of course, in slightly different ways that they're going about it. But the general principle is there about how to make sure that we don't overstep the mark in what we should be doing with AI. So, for example, trying to predict future crimes. I did hear a story the other day about some police force that accidentally managed to do that. They had, but these are clearly things we don't want to happen because we really shouldn't be doing that. So those are things that have been decided as probably not very ethical. And it's kind of come about at a good time, really, because we've gone for a very exciting period where everyone's got very excited about AI and what it can do. And they've all rushed forwards with various strategies and things that they thought they could go off and do, and AI is generally touted as an answer, but no one really knows what the question is. So the board come down and say, right, AI is the answer. Okay, but what was the question? What were we asking? What were we trying to do with it? So everyone's kind of running around doing what they can and what they think they should be doing, and I think we're really getting to a place now where we've got the regulations coming out for the AI governance, and organizations are starting to realize actually that's probably not the best way of going about it. We probably do need to have strategies of what it is we're actually trying to do, and they're trying to claw back from this excitable stage, as I'll call it, to something that actually makes sense for them to do. So, okay, this is the question we're trying to answer, and we think AI could answer that question for us, and we're trying to proceed with that. So those two things do seem to have come in at roughly the same time, as everyone gets to grips with what AI means for everyone ultimately. And I do think it's a very good thing to have put the guidelines in place, because, you know, if we look at an example that was given to me recently around pharmaceuticals, for example, if we didn't have regulation in pharmaceuticals, it would be a very different world right now to where we live, because, you know, how would you trust anything that anyone said about a product, and how would anyone have ever stepped forwards in a sensible way in terms of bringing products out, testing, all of this kind of thing, without the regulation? And AI is kind of in that same similar space. And I thought that was a very good analogy for that, because, you know, it builds the trust in the product, it builds the trust in the way forwards. And there's obviously varying degrees of views in the public eye at the moment about AI, and some skepticism, but I think it builds a level of ethical accountability as well, that when you think about it, most organizations have anyway, because they have ethics and morals about how they do their business. So they wouldn't want, you know, some of the replies we've seen in the press from AI chatbots, for example, going out to people from their employees. They wouldn't expect that. That would not be what they wanted. So why would you not build that into your AI models, that you have those same ethics and morals? So I think it's all very well related, and it's all come at roughly the same time. And I think it is a very good step forwards, even though obviously it's going to force organizations to kind of look at what they're doing, and sort of build those guardrails into what they're generally doing as a way of reducing the risk. That seems to be the typical way forwards for most organizations. So yeah, I think overall it will be a good step forwards, if not a slight irritation to some organizations maybe, but for the most part, I think it's come at a time when they're reviewing all the strategies anyway.
Okay. How does automation help organizations with their AI initiatives, and how can it do more?
So I think the basic premise of current automation that we have at the moment is really around, it can help with the data. So that being the most important part of the whole model. It can very much help with the data. It can help manage data pipelines. It can help manage workload or orchestration, and help bring the data into the right place. So that's in its base form is where the automation can help. Where I really think it gives a big advantage to have a centralized automation platform to do that, and actually run those AI pipelines, if you want to call them those, is around some of the things we've touched upon that are still problems for organizations. So, you know, if we look at the sort of agile way that AI is potentially going to move forwards, you know, everyone's obviously operating in an agile methodology. They're developing in an agile way. They're trying new things. They're trying different ways of doing things. And inevitably now we've moved into a phase where we'll have strategies. Those strategies are probably going to change. So if we change those strategies, how do we adapt with that as we go? You know, if we've set up our particular way of working, we want to change, and automation can clearly help with that. In terms of a centralized automation platform is very easy to move around. It's also very easy to visualize where things are coming from. So if we suddenly change our strategy and we stop focusing on one particular area of the business, but then we're going to focus on another area of the business, but actually we didn't plug into those data sources yet, we can quickly pivot to that and work with the entire business. So you don't want the data to be the slow point in your organization. You want to be as quick with that as you are with your changing strategies, and be able to pivot the organization. So that's one place it can definitely help. And on a similar vein, it can also help with the changing tech stacks that we have. So if we're trying to also run these data pipelines, but then also change our technology stacks, we can go ahead and do that, regardless of whether it be in the cloud, or whether it be in a SaaS system, or a legacy system, or a mainframe system. Wherever our data pipelines are, we can visualize them. We can have the insights into where they're going. We can also run simulations to see what the impacts on SLAs are, and how the changes will actually impact everything. And then we can actually, you know, implement those changes very easily, because we're already plugged into the different systems that we're talking to. It's just a case of moving the things around centrally, rather than having to redirect everything to make sure that our data pipelines aren't affected. And of course, that's also another place where, you know, SLA management, making sure the data turns up on time and we're making sure that everything's running through smoothly. That's an obvious thing as well. And the other area I think it can help in terms of customer experiences and employee experience is around self-service. So our data scientists, we can enable the ability for them to have self-service, so they're not worrying about logging lots of IT tickets. We can also make sure that the data runs through smoothly as quickly as possible, so that we're getting to the place where we are getting the quickest data available in the shortest time. So we're not using schedule based where we're kind of allowing hours of periods of time. We can swash that down into kind of this job finishes, that job finishes, that job finishes, and move things along very quickly. And of course, we can see the whole end-to-end pipeline and manage that. I think the other part of this really for me as well is kind of in post-processing. So there's one thing getting the data to where we need it to go to, but we'd already spoken about we need to bring that data together. We need to process it. We need to do things to it. Automation, centralized automation platforms obviously can run those parts as well. So we can make sure we get to the actual end where we have the data set we want, and then we can actually pass that across. And yeah, there's some other benefits around being the scheduler of schedulers. So we can look at a centralized platform that schedules other schedulers and other pieces of the puzzle, make sure everything still lines up. But it really truly, that big message is really about the whole end-to-end piece and the insights that can come from that, and the management of the SLAs, and making sure we get the data we actually need where it needs to get to. So yeah, those are the kind of big pieces I think that automation can help beyond the obvious data pipelines.
Okay. And let's talk a little bit about some of the other things that are on people's minds. That we want to reduce the amount of compute needed to, build these AI models. So how can automation help reduce the computation needed for these AI models, and therefore the cost and carbon impact?
Okay, yeah. So I think there's an indirect benefit there, and obviously this is a big talking point at the moment. In a world where we're trying to reduce our CO2 emissions, we've essentially introduced something that does the exact opposite and really has massively increased the carbon footprint and of course the costs, because the two are pretty much linked in terms of compute time is costing money, it's also costing CO2. It's fairly straightforward in that sense. And I was at a recent conference where we were talking about how do you actually equate the exact amount of energy that's coming into this, and of course that's incredibly complicated because data centers have supplies from lots of different providers. So you can only really go by the guidelines of what the data center is telling you about where it's getting its power from at a certain point in time. You're never going to get down to the full statistics underneath. So the obvious thing for organizations to do is to reduce the amount of computation time they're using, because it's the one thing they can actually control in a relative fashion. So I think it's probably going to be around, therefore, making sure the data we put in to actually compute is what we want. And by that, what I mean is coming back to the kind of, we can have all you can eat data and therefore we don't worry about it too much. This is about getting back to getting to the data we actually want to put through the model and then processing that through. So what we can do with automation is, we touched on this a bit just a minute ago, which is around the post-processing. So we can run the jobs that actually will take the data set that we have, which is pulled together, and then actually turn that into the data set we want. And then that's what we can move forwards with. And we're not just putting everything in. And also, I think there's something to be said here around the strategies that organizations are having around their AIs, where we can actually start to work out what is it of the data that we're bringing in is actually relevant to that particular model that we're trying to work on. So not bringing everything in, just putting in the things that we actually need to have and working that out. And I think we can also apply that as part of the entire workflow of how we get from start to finish. And I think we can also build into that some of the things we were talking about, the AI governance around data privacy, for example. How do we control that? Well, it's going to be a case of, once we've got it all together, we can process it through and make sure we have what we need. And I think, again, if you look at the self-service and trying to make things happen as quickly as we can, it's a brilliant way of aligning with all of those pieces and bringing them all together into one platform, so that we've got the ability to do that still, and we can do it in the quickest way we possibly can by running it through one platform end to end. And also still, of course, achieve our SLAs, which are incredibly, all of these things are incredibly difficult to do if we're using a fragmented scheduling process to actually get the pieces together into one place, especially if it's a time-driven one. So, you know, your typical standard, we'll run this at between 10 and it will finish at 11, and then we'll run something from, you know, 11:30 to 12:30, and so on and so forth. You quickly, there's lots of gaps there where we could have actually just been running one after the other and saving a lot of time in getting from that end start to the finish, especially if we're going to post-process the data afterwards. Because that's obviously going to take time. It's not a magic wand as such in that sense, but it will definitely help accelerate things once it gets into the computation for the models.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Martin.